In this section, I'll offer a broad survey of the diverse practices wrapped into agroecology food systems. However, let me first say that agroecology, regenerative agriculture, permaculture, and other labels for the same umbrella of practices are not historically new. These techniques originate in various indigenous cultures' food systems and seek to mimic the exchanges and interrelations observed in ecosystems. So to start, why do we need agroecology? Many people are aware of the common issues associated with industrial agriculture. These include heavy machinery that compresses the soil, constant tillage, which disrupts the soil food web, plant roots, and the mycelium of fungi, a monoculture of a single plant, which does not allow the full breadth of nutrient cycling throughout the soil, chemicals sprayed as herbicides and pesticides, which can drift in the air and contaminate plants on organic farms, or wind up in our food and be carcinogenic to us, or flow into rivers, lakes, and oceans and threaten aquatic life through eutrophication. And finally, industrial agriculture is rapidly depleting topsoil rather than maintaining or boosting it. Agroecology food production, on the other hand, is quite different. Synthetic chemical sprays are not used, but rather compost, compost teas, and mulch are frequently used to add necessary nutrients. Tillage is either drastically reduced or not used at all, which also means that soil compressing heavy machinery is not on the land as often. Plant diversity is embraced through polyculture farming, and companion planting and intercropping are employed in the form of plant guilds. Plant guilds are collections of different plants that form synergies when grown in close proximity, so that the nutrients that one crop desperately needs can be supplied by its neighboring plant that we know accumulates the specific nutrient. Companion planting also attracts beneficial insects and pollinators and deters pests, or those insects that prey on food crops. One of the best known examples of a plant guild in agroecology is the Three Sisters technique, which comes from various indigenous peoples of the Americas. This is where you plant corn or maize, pole beans, and then squash, or pumpkins or gourds, together as a group. The corn is planted first, and once it has a head start and is perhaps a foot high, the beans are sown around its base, which then climb vertically up the corn stalk as if the corn is a trellis. The beans are nitrogen fixers, and they supply nitrogen to the corn roots. The squash is then planted to spread horizontally across the ground so that it can shade the ground and conserve soil moisture and suppress any weeds or undesirable plants. Agroecology also features succession planting, where multiple plantings of the same crop, such as lettuce, are sown several weeks apart to ensure continuous supply. Crop rotation is also very important, so that you can prevent disease or undesired insects from preying on the plants. Additionally, agroecology emphasizes perennial food systems. These may feature perennial vegetables like asparagus or rhubarb, herbs like chives or thyme, fruit shrubs like raspberries or currants, and perennial agroforestry systems, which include fruit and nut tree orchards, multi-story food forests, silvopasture, alley cropping, riparian buffer zones, windbreaks or hedgerows, and more. And what are these? A food forest seeks to make use of space efficiently through multiple layers with both horizontal and vertical growth. From top to bottom, it has a canopy layer, such as a large fruit or nut tree, a low tree layer, such as a dwarf fruit tree, a shrub layer, herbaceous layer, a root vegetable layer, ground cover layer, and then finally vines and vertical climbers. Silvopasture is where you graze chickens, pigs, goats, or other farm animals in a semi-forested fruit or nut tree pasture, collecting the tree and animal products and using the animal's manure for compost. Alley cropping is where you plant fruit or nut trees in rows from south to north with vegetables planted in the space between. They're arranged from south to north so that your trees don't shade out the vegetables, since the sun sits in the southern part of the sky predominantly, and you want to make sure that your gaps between rows of trees can adequately receive sunlight. Riparian buffer zones are forested areas along rivers or streams, and these help stabilize riverbanks and prevent erosion while creating habitat for animals and potentially offering some tree products. Windbreaks and hedgerows are trees planted in a row that shelter your crops from the prevailing wind, and this helps to prevent wind damage on your crops. Basically, agroecology emphasizes the use of trees in food systems for their groundwater holding capacity, their carbon sequestration, topsoil regeneration, animal and insect habitat, the harvestable products, cool shade and hot weather, and more. Many of our common vegetables are annuals and are still grown in agroecology food systems, but they're a part of a broader polyculture rather than being grown in a monoculture as a single crop. Also, typically, cover crops that are cold hardy are grown between the vegetable's fall harvest and the planting next spring, so that there are always living roots in the soil year-round, rather than letting fields lie fallow between seasonal plantings. Cover crops allow topsoil to be regenerated as organic matter and biomass accumulates, and soil organisms are fed through this decaying organic matter. Nutrients are cycled and carbon is sequestered. Further, a richer topsoil is able to absorb and hold more water in place, acting as a buffer against flooding. And cover crops provide habitat for animals and insects. In a time of species extinction and expected drought or heavy rainfall, cover crops are a vital practice. One final practice to examine is that of swales. Swales can help to grow food on steeper hills that most farmers or food producers would overlook. Swales are basically ditches dug horizontally across a slope, with soil mounded higher on the downslope side of the ditch. They're basically earthworks. When it rains without a swale system, rainwater flows downhill and pools at the bottom of the hill, leaving the soil mid-slope too dry to grow food. However, with one or more swales, when it rains, water is collected and held mid-slope, and this water infiltrates into the groundwater table, and this allows the soil moisture necessary for plant growth. Perennial food crops are then planted into the swale mounds on the downhill side of the swale, and this both stabilizes the banks and allows these plants to draw water from the swale or ditch right below. It's said that water is life, and the central principle here is to first restore water to dry soil before trying to grow food. So, as you can see, there's a wealth of information here, and I've only offered a broad survey. The idea is to understand the garden or farm as a holistic system in which all parts are interconnected, internally within the farm system and externally to the surrounding landscape. We're essentially harnessing lessons from ecology to regenerate the land while growing healthy, nutrient-dense food. Often, agroecology spaces are beautiful and pleasant to be in, offering a rich, multi-sensory experience of colors, smells, and so on. Since agroecology practices regenerate soil and offer animal and insect habitat, they can be seen as an intersection between farming or food systems and ecosystem restoration. Again, the key is observing lessons from ecology, freedom from chemicals, the absolute non-use of chemical sprays, and using perennial foods in polyculture, looking for the synergies and connections between different plants. I hope that you explore agroecology more.